Hi, Black Feather here. I have a story for you. If I have an intent for this story at all, an ideal for this story at all, it's to retrieve the soul of leadership. Whether that's in terms of people and organizations that we put up to be leaders in our world, or on an individual level, our own leadership. It happened to the David character about 10 years ago. I was in Austria visiting my half-sister, lovely woman. It was their Sylvester, their New Year's celebration. And I was with her at her friend's house. A lot of friends were gathered in the house, in the kitchen. I was sitting in the kitchen with everybody else who was there. Almost everybody else who was there. And the hostess said to me, "You know, I know you don't know much German anymore. You don't speak, you don't understand as much German as you would when I was a kid. When I did, I told her when I was a kid I used to speak it fluently, but I lost it." And she said, I think you're going to have a much better time if you go into the other room where the teenagers are, and because they learn to speak English in school, they're always looking to practice. You'll probably enjoy that a lot better. So I said, yes, thank you very much. So I did. And around that time, I was, as part of my healing practice, if you want to call it that, I was doing animal card readings, so like animal totems. And I had my deck with me, and so I did readings for some of them. And for a lot of them, it was the first time they'd experienced anything like that, heard of anything like that, and where I was doing readings to tell them, maybe an animal totem that would describe them, or an animal totem that would be most helpful for them in, say, a situation they were experiencing in their life. A lot of them were really excited about it. They found it really helpful, really interesting. And while I was doing readings, I guess I'll qualify this by saying that at the time, at this point in my experience, through the healing I'd done, through what I'd been exposed to, through the work I was doing, people referred to me as a shaman. I was doing things, even though I didn't apprentice in the traditional sense, because I did soul retrievals, because I was moving spirits on, because I was whatever else I was doing, they referred to me as a shaman. Not that a title is necessary, but it just gives you some backdrop, I suppose. And as I was doing readings, I had the very distinct impression that there was a demon very close by. And I was having a telepathic conversation with it. And I thought to myself, well, these kids were really good with getting their cards read. They found that really interesting. But like I said, for some of them it was totally new. But if I tell them I'm going to exorcise a demon right now, I can't see that going over very well. And so what I did was, I said to the demon, again, silently, wordlessly, telepathically, it's like, you come into me, I'll deal with you later. Like I was some kind of armored truck for demons or something. And this was the first time I'd worked with, I'd exorcised demons that were external to me, but this was the first time I'd ever invited anything in, which would have been fine. except I forgot that I did that. And the next 3 days and nights were the most hellish thing I could have imagined, or I couldn't even imagine how hellish it was. That said, it wasn't only hellish. It was like, somebody when I described the experience to somebody, they likened it to being bipolar. And I will say, I never had any bipolar inclinations either before this or in the 10 years since. Anybody who knows me would say would not understand how that could describe me in any way. But what happened was it would alternate. So I'd start to go up. I'd start to, things feeling good, information around me being positive, and then I'd cycle down. Basically, it was like there was a median, and then I'd go up and down, and each time I went down, I'd go up just a little higher than I was last time, and then inevitably come back down a little bit lower, and the amplitude would increase. So when I was on my way up, at one point I would understand everything that a certain guru I was following at the time understood. And as enlightening as that was, brilliant, as joyful as that was, I'd also get the other end of the spectrum. And how do I begin to explain how hellish things were? You know what? I don't know that it's helpful to describe how hellish things were. I'll give you some highlights, but essentially, I don't believe it would be helpful to you. And as I said, the next time I'd start on the way up, so I understood everything that guru understood, and then it's like the next time up, I might understand everything that Christ would have understood. Whether you believe Christ to be actual or not, it just kind of gives you the idea. And then I'd feel myself peak and then start to come back down again. And I thought, oh my God, if I understood everything that Christ understood, what's the opposite end of that? And dread would start to fill me, as you can imagine. And without giving a lot of details, I will say through the course of all of this, nobody got hurt, right? Just in case your mind is going somewhere that it doesn't need to go, nobody got hurt. But in any case, after that, I would, as I'd make my way back up, as I was going back up, I understood more than Christ understood. On one of my ups, I experienced, I don't mean in the biblical sense, I'm probably not using this word, this is probably not the best word to describe what happened, but I experienced rapture, like that blissful ecstasy, love taking you apart. And then I experienced the other end of that. So it's at different points, faced fears. Fears to the point where at some points I realized I just had to give up. Long story short of the hellish parts of my experience, I thought I died many times over. On the upper end of the experience, even when I thought, I realized I was on my way up, and as I was starting on the way up, I thought, it can't get any better. It can't be any better than rapture. How does it get better than that? And yet, it got better than rapture. On my next up after that, it got better than what was better than rapture. And it got better than that. And it got better exponentially. Not that there can be an ultimate better, because there was almost never an ultimate better. It just kept going and going and going. And of course, the other end of it was going and going, going. On the physical side of things, when I was in the down state, I was wandering around. It was wintertime, snow on the ground, and I was wandering around in the forest for hours with very little clothing on. Yeah, just what you'd imagine would happen if you were possessed. But the worst fear that I had, even aside from the experience, the belief that I died many times over, and went through how much karma, had how much karma and evilness brought to my awareness, or appeared to me. The scariest thing, and it's still, I laugh about it now, but because I see the fallacy of it, but to some extent it still triggers me a little. The scariest thing was wandering through the forest, and as I was worried I was, I'm probably not using this word in the most effective way either, but I was worried I was Wendigo. And my idea of Wendigo at the time was essentially like hungry ghost, wandering for all of eternity, the fearful part being without seeing another living, loving soul ever for all of eternity. That was that was a very real fear for me that pretty much leveled me, even aside from all the other stuff I'd experienced. So after 3 days and nights of this, I was talking to my sister. My half sister wasn't there, by the way. She'd because my trip had been really last minute. She'd actually had a trip planned somewhere tropical, and she was away, which is all as it was supposed to be, all divinely orchestrated. This was something that wouldn't have been helpful for other people to experience with me. Something I needed to do on my own, so to speak. Not that I was ultimately on my own. But I was talking to my nephew after these 3 days and nights, and on the phone saying, he was checking on me, and I was saying, yeah, I'm not doing very well. I didn't tell him the extent of what was going on because I didn't know how to explain it. I was at a loss for how to explain it. And so he came over with a psychologist, and I didn't understand a lot of what they were saying. I mean, the psychologist did speak English. He was asking me questions. I'm sure I didn't tell him the whole of my experience at the time, but and then he would confer with my nephew and talk to him in German, which I didn't understand. And as he was talking, as he was there, he kind of, the appearance of him really kind of freaked me out, which sounds really funny when I, considering what I'd experienced the last 3 days and nights, that this one person, the physicality of him freaked me out. He had this manner of, when he was looking at something, he didn't move his eyes in his head, he would move his whole head. Is that creepy or what? I just, I think even aside from that, I just knew, I was basically having this conversation with myself that said, David, as terrifying and confusing as these last 3 days were, if you thought that was bad, if you go into this man's care, you're done for. I knew I would be done for. As much as the last 3 days and nights, I hadn't been done for. And I thought, you have to figure this out. And good thing I did figure it out, because my nephew told me afterwards. Somehow I backtrack a little bit. Somehow I convinced the psychologist that I didn't need him, and convinced my nephew that I didn't need him. Because I was telling myself I had to figure this out, and then remembered what I'd done 3 days before that I welcomed this demon into myself. And I thought, oh my God, is that what a possession is like? Right? And from that point on, I just knew I was going to be fine. I don't know how it is that I talked the psychologist into leaving, because my nephew told me after the fact that the psychologist was saying, there's no hope for him. We're going to I'm just going to have to pump him full of antipsychotics. We're going to have to put him on a plane back to Canada. We're going to arrange it so that from the plane he gets taken to an institution, and he's going to have to be sedated, heavily medicated the rest of his life. Yeah. So thankfully, something within me had the wherewithal to think, oh, you welcomed a demon into yourself 3 days ago. And again, I don't know how it is that I talked the psychologist into leaving, and my nephew into the idea that I don't need him anymore, but I did. I don't know how it is that I knew what to do next. I knew I was very quickly going to be better, but I also knew there were some motions I had to go through. So I told my nephew what had happened. I don't know if he believed me. Weirded him out a little bit, to say the least. And I said, go get Rosie. Go down the street and get Rosie, who was a Reiki master, at least a Reiki practitioner, that my sisters introduced me to before she left. And I said, she's going to be weirded out, but tell her it's okay. Tell her, convince her that I know what to do, and that she's supposed to help me. So she came over. I explained to her, the gist of what happened. She was terrified, but I calmed her down. And I said, I don't know how it is that I know what to do, but this is what you do. Can I tell you what that was? Do I remember what that was? No, it was like I was being communicated to in a foreign language, an ancient language, and I was, to some extent, doing my best to translate and give her that in English, because she did understand some English. So I wouldn't do it again, I don't think, but I'm not sorry it happened. How I describe what happened. I'll talk about one of the benefits of what happened. Okay. One of the benefits of what happened was exorcisms became really easy after that. Somebody would, if somebody were to tell me they had a problem, an exorcism was as simple as a little jolt in my body and having a giggle, and they would experience the benefit, feel that release, that influence not being there. I'm sure there are a lot of people watching this who would think, yeah, well, that happened all in your head. Did you consider the possibility that it happened all in your head? And of course I have. Ultimately, all of your experience, all of your story is in your head. All of your story is an appearance. One of the ways that I've learned to see this experience is the reality of it is all of it was appearance. All of it wasn't essentially what I am. All of it, all of your appearances, anything that appears, isn't essentially what you are. What you are is the awareness that all of these appearances play out on. So all the things that appeared in the down state, the images that I'd be presented with, the thoughts that I'd be presented with, the visions of horror and evil that I'd be presented with, and the emotions associated with, which is again an appearance, and all of the appearances in the upper levels. Although to some extent they were a little closer in describing what our essential nature actually is, which is peace, bliss, joy, happiness. The appearances part of things, like the appearance of spiritual figures, sometimes in the lower levels at least, there'd be the idea of myself as some kind of exalted being, but still being, still a person to some extent. So much of that was also appearances. The only thing, coming to this now, or this truth having been unfolded, not that time has actually passed, but this truth having been unfolding itself. I was neither of those things. I was the awareness upon which all of that plays out. Because essentially, if you look at your I amness, if you think about, okay, well, if I consider what my I amness is from, let's say, birth until now, we won't even go into past lives and future lives and stuff like that. But from birth until now, what of you has remained? What of you has been constant? Your body hasn't been constant. Your body has changed how many times over? Science will say your body has changed this many times over. Your cells renew themselves. If you're physically not the same body as you were when you were born. Your thoughts have changed. Your feelings have changed. The environment around you, circumstances seemingly have changed. The only thing that's been constant is your I amness. Your sense of presence, your sense of being, regardless of all the other appearances. Rupert Spira describes it really well when he says, imagine a self-aware screen. You are that self-aware screen. So it doesn't matter what images play out on the screen. You could have something really horrible on one side. You could have something really heavenly, good on the other side. Essentially, all of those appearances just almost veil, they can't, but they kind of veil what they're all playing out on. And you are what they're playing out on. Just kind of as an addendum, I guess, to that experience. People have asked me before, what was it? What was that demon there for? Like, who was it for? And was that person helped? So I had a good idea who that demon was there for or connected to. And it was this one of the teenagers who was in military training, who really would have wished that the exercises he was doing were, it wasn't a training exercise, essentially. So, he had some anger and confusion attached to himself, is one way to put it. And was he helped? The only way that I have every confidence that he was helped. I had no follow-up with him. But to give you an example of other times after that when people have been helped, I'll give you the example of a story that comes to mind is when my partner Maria Whitefeather and I were kind of still just getting to know each other. We were sitting in a tea shop, and she had a deck of oracle cards that she said she wasn't comfortable with. For her, they felt dark. They felt dark, for a better way to put it. Brought up fear in her. And so she thought, oh, Black Feather's not afraid of the dark. So I'll give them to him. So she gave me this deck of cards, and right away I shuffled, and out fell a card. Didn't have to pull it. The card fell out, specifically about dark entities. And so I think I saw her physically back up a little bit, and I thought, oh, how funny is that? And usually if I just kind of reaffirmed why she didn't want that deck and why it was meant for me. And I usually if I pull a card without an intention beforehand, it's typically a card of prophecy. So, in my mind, just, casually wondering, oh, I wonder how that'll materialize. I wonder how that's going to play itself out. And so after a bit, we were going to leave, and she went to the bathroom. I was at the counter settling up. And this fellow came in off the street who looked a little worse for wear. He looked like he'd been living rough for quite a while. I don't know that he was under the influence of something physical, but he seemed very confused, not quite there, so to speak. And I was the only other person in the shop, and the cashier, the person who was behind the counter, the store owner, she moved off to get something. I think she went to the back. And so he was standing in front of me and saying to me, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I know I was supposed to come in. And I thought, I know what you're doing here. Thought to myself, I know what you're doing here. And felt a little jolt, felt a little giggle come up, and knew that it was done already. But still, engaging in conversation with him, not telling him, this is what was happening. I assumed I had his soul's permission to do what I did, and he did present himself to me. And so he still just kind of looked around, a little confused. He repeated again, yeah, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Is the coffee good? Is the tea good? And I said to him, tell you what, if you feel like you'd like something to eat, why don't you go have a seat there by the window, and I'll order something for you. I'll pay for it, and just sit there and enjoy yourself. And then Maria came out of the bathroom, and we left. I told her what happened after the fact, but we left. And it was maybe 2 months after that we saw him again. She didn't recognize him. She saw him when he was in the tea shop still, but after we saw him a couple months later, she didn't recognize him. He was, partly because his hair was cut short. He was dressed comfortably, like he hadn't been on the streets for who knows how long, and clean shaven and lucid, for lack of a better way to put it, lucid. And getting a story from him, he'd moved back into his parents, needed to get a landing place, and to that point, he was not the person that came into the tea shop before that. And while I'm on it, I should mention a couple things that I've learned. Other things I've learned. One is that demons don't have any power except for the power that you give them. And they don't have any power without your permission. And they have power when you don't realize they're operating, as was my experience. The other thing I'm going to say is describing when I describe to people what a demon is. So on the one hand, as pretty much anything you can imagine, on the one hand, they don't exist at all. And at the same time, it's helpful to deal with them as if they are real. So how I describe what a demon is I use this metaphor of, let's say there's nothing but blackness, nothing but the void, nothing but space. And I think of it like building, creation extending itself into the void of space. So it's kind of like building a highway, right? Building a road. It's like where there's nothing to begin with, at some point shapes have to start to materialize in this nothingness. I kind of refer to them as potholes. They're a place for love to enter into. They're a place where it seems there's no love, which isn't possible, but where love's attention can be brought. And, that's why that's how I understand how it is that exorcism is so easy now. Because it's not yourself as an individual egoic person with your individual egoic thoughts, hopefully being pure enough to overcome a demon, because you're so much more than that. Essentially what happens is you come into awareness of, the demon is no more real than any of the other appearances you might experience. You are the awareness itself that everything plays out on, and, essentially, poof, gone. You can still have a story connected with it. You can still play out that story by asking the demon to leave a present for the person once they leave. I mean, in essence, what they were helping you with Because, seemingly negative spirits are in a helpful role to us as much as helpful spirits are. Good spirits are. So in essence, they've already given us a gift, but sometimes I'll ask for a gift regardless, and usually that comes it can come in many forms. But essentially, I just thought I should clarify, why there's no reason to be afraid. So, do people get better as a result of, being exercised, a spirit moving on? That's been my experience. Ultimately, of course, I'm aware that on some level, everything I see is a projection. Everything out there is an appearance. Everything is a story. It doesn't matter what plays out in the story, how horrific things might look, how the feelings you might have in that regard, how crazy the world appears to be. Go into the peace to realize, as crazy as this sounds, demonic possession didn't sound crazy enough, but as crazy as this sounds, realize that you are the awareness, the self-aware screen, consciousness itself, that all appearances play out on. It's not just where peace is to be found. It's where realization of yourself as peace is to be found. Not something that you see as outside yourself and assimilate into yourself, but with the realization that that's what you are, all appearances become irrelevant. Wishing you every good thing.